Hi everyone, my name is Fatma Rana, and for my digital project, I will be discussing the topic of medieval judicial procedures. Introduction. The medieval judicial procedures were influenced by the concepts of feudalism. The feudal system and the Magna Carta gave nobles, lords, or anyone who was wealthy the power of jurisdiction. My presentation will focus on the trial of ordeal. These painful procedures were carried out by the medieval churches to determine if someone was guilty or innocent. Purpose. The overall purpose of these procedures were to prove a verdict made by the priest or by the judge. In most cases, these trials were biased or unfair. If the priest wanted to accuse you of a crime that you didn't commit, he easily could because that's how much power he had within the church. The priest believed that if a person was innocent, God would bestow his mercy upon that person and protect him from any severe punishments. However, majority of the time, the defendant would lose their life due to the false accusations made by the priest. The medieval judicial system was truly corrupt due to the interference of higher authorities. History. Pope Innocent III banned the trial of ordeal in 1215. The reason behind his banning was because of the severity and the brutality of these methods and procedures. However, that did not stop Europe or colonial America from adapting to these procedures and methods. The practice of trial of ordeal was also seen in India, Southeast Asia, and parts of Africa. Even ancient literature such as Ramayana and the Old Testament was influenced by the practice of ordeal. So the first trial that I'm going to talk about is a trial by fire. Now this trial was typically used on women who were accused of committing adultery. In this trial, the defendant, which is the woman, would have to walk 9 paces barefoot on scorching plowshares. Now, scorching plowshares can be defined in simpler terms as walking on piping metal. After 3 days have passed, the priest would make his way to the woman's house to check up on her foot. Now, if the woman's foot is healed, that means that God is proving her innocence. However, if her foot is infected or blistered, that means that God is saying that this woman is guilty of committing adultery. Now, if the woman is found guilty of committing adultery, she would be stoned to death or exiled from the community. What's hypocritical of this whole scenario is that it takes 2 people to commit adultery. Nowhere in this trial it is mentioned that a man has to go through this. That means only women are held accountable for adultery. This goes to show how hypocritical the medieval judicial procedures really were. The second trial that I'll be talking about is a trial of water. This trial was used on anyone who was accused of partaking in witchcraft. In this trial, the defendant would be tied up by rope and stripped naked and thrown into a body of water that the church thought was holy. Now, if the defendant floated up to the surface, it meant that they were guilty of committing witchcraft. This was determined because the water, which was deemed as holy, rejected their body's presence. If you sunk to the bottom of the water, that meant that you were innocent. This is because the holy water accepted your presence. Now, if you were guilty of committing witchcraft, you were either hung or exiled from the community. The third trial that I'm going to talk about is one that I have not heard of before. It's the trial by ordeal beam. This trial was typically used by West African tribes, and it was used on people who were accused of being a witch or possessed by evil spirits. In this procedure, the defendant would be forced to swallow an ordeal bean, which was considered to be a very poisonous bean, and it is still considered to be a very poisonous bean today. Now, if the defendant swallowed the bean and threw up right after, that meant that God was signaling to the people that this person is innocent. However, if the person digested the bean, two things would happen. A, he would die an instant death due to the poison, and B, he would be guilty of the crime. So either way, majority of the time, the outcome of this trial would be death, because the innocent would be affected by the poison and the guilty would just die instant death from the poison. The last trial that I'll be talking about is the trial by host. The trial by host was typically used on priests who were accused of perjury or any other crime. What was so unusual to me about this trial was that the priest was considered to be this divine figure in the church, yet he also was the most corrupt person in the church. In this trial, the priest would go up to the church altar and literally beg God to choke him. Then he would make his way down the altar and grab a piece of this huge bread, also known as the host. Then he would proceed to swallow the bread. If the priest didn't choke on the bread, he was considered to be innocent. However, if the priest did choke on the bread, A, he would die by choking, and B, nobody would save him because they would finally understand how corrupt he was. So either way, if he choked on the bread, he would die. Conclusion. The trial of ordeal took more innocent lives than it did guilty. These bizarre methods and procedures were a way for the church to figure out who was innocent and who was truly guilty. These methods and these trials were influenced by past law codes such as the Hammurabi Code of Law. The purpose of my presentation was to show the class how corrupt the medieval judicial procedures really were. How if a priest wanted to frame an innocent person, he could easily do it. The whole justice system revolved around the protection and the judgment of God. Getting burned by fire or sticking your hand in hot water was a way to determine your innocence or if you were guilty. Majority of the torture methods used in the medieval times have been gladly banned and forbidden for decades. The following references are what I used throughout my presentation. I hope you all learned something new about the medieval judicial procedures and enjoyed my presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and this is Fatma Rana signing off.